Welcome to the webinar. Thanks for joining. My name is Todd Nielsen from Matrix Insights. I'm joined today by my colleague Dario Nardi. Together, we're pleased to welcome you and thank you for popping by today. We wanted to kick off today by alerting you to some upcoming opportunities to learn, grow, and join our conversation around using personality and EQ in your work, your teaching, your coaching, and your use of type in any setting that might be relevant and helpful for you. Upcoming events include neuroscience on why learning fails and how to turn it around with Dr. Roger Pearman, also a co-founder here at Matrix Insights. That's on July 27th. On August 24th, Dr. Pearman will be back on the stage with a session he's entitling Soft Skills Are the Hardest, which is a common euphemism for us to use and introduce our work in human development and learning and development using type and EQ. And then Dario will be back on September the 21st, all at 1 p.m. Eastern. On the 21st of September, we'll be doing Neuro secrets of NPs. So Dario, welcome today. By way of introduction, for any of you who might not be familiar with Dario's work, although looking across the spectrum of folks who I see have joined, I suspect many of you are, but for those who don't know, Dario is a recognized personality type expert. He's an author, a speaker around the world. He teaches at UCLA, and in his teaching on human complex systems, he also conducts research into the connection between brain activity patterns and personality, which is what we'll be talking about today. As a writer and a developer of assessments, as well as a software designer, Dario applies his personality knowledge to human development and learning. And at Matrix Insights, Dario is a co-founder. He helps us apply his research and his teaching experience towards building our unique interactive multi-lens approach to personality-centered development. Dario, welcome back to the webinar stage.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon to all of you, and thank you, Todd, for having me again. I apologize a little bit for my informal wear at the moment. Some of you may know Los Angeles is today experiencing a record heat wave. We're like 25 degrees above average, and it's going to be approaching 106. And we're just not built for that. My office isn't built for that, and so on. So it's a lesson in brain control, I guess, to power through the heat. Okay, the last time we talked about the sensing judging folks with the 16 types and what their brains look like. And today we will be talking about the sensing perceiving folks and what their brains look like. And like the SJs, the sensing perceiving types make up a large percentage of the population, perhaps around 35%. So, you know, your organization or clients may differ, but do know there's a lot of folks out there, and we're going to try and give them justice today. Some checking in. I think all of that's good, technically. If folks have questions, by the way, I believe, Todd, they can direct those to you by typing those in on the side. Is that right?
Please do, yes. The bottom panel of the Zoom interface includes a button that reads chat, and I've just chatted out to everybody. Please chat your questions, comments, and feedback here. So do look for that panel. We'd love to hear from you.
Okay, great. And now let's get in. I'm going to go over a little bit what I have before, and we'll do again, just for those of you who are new or want a little bit of a refresher, how brain imaging works. I've been involved with this since fall of 2006. Hard to believe how the years go by. You may be familiar with my work from Neuroscience of Personality, the book in 2011, which is also quite a number of years ago. So since then, we really have dramatically increased the number of subjects to over 300 now. I'm very lucky to have interns from UCLA, students who can work with me 3 to 6 months at a time and bring in folks of all different types. And at the beginning, getting the SP folks, especially sensing, thinking, perceiving folks, was quite a challenge. But we've been able to bolster their numbers. So what does this look like in the labs? Folks wear an EEG cap. EEG stands for electroencephalogram. It's a technology that's been around a long time. Back even to the 1920s, folks realized that they could assess electrical activity in the brain. That's essentially what it's looking at, is voltage in the brain. And then decompose those readings in the same way that your radio can take the signals that travel through the air and decompose those into music. Okay, we can find out a lot about the brain, what's going on where, how different regions interact with each other and so on. But in order to get meaningful data, we actually need to just, do something interesting with people more than have them sit there for 6 minutes or 12 minutes or whatever passively. So I send folks through a protocol, a battery of activities meant to stimulate different regions of the brain, so visual, auditory, kinesthetic, decision-making, creativity, all these things. And as well, having personality type in mind, also having activities that appeal to all the different types, which is often a limitation in neuroscience. It tends to be very narrow, which is great if we're studying one narrow thing. But here we want to get a nice big picture. So lots and lots of daily activities is what they're up to. And let's take a look then a little bit more at, oops, there we go. There we go. Okay, so this is a bird's eye view of the neocortex, which a nice metaphor is a toolbox or orchestral suite. And you can get a sense from all of the different, sorry, I have to turn off something just sort of silly that doesn't belong there. There we go. You can get a sense of all of the different things that the brain helps us out with. So, for example, this region right here is involved with language, processing of language content, involved with deduction, mental planning. Those are the three main things that it helps us with. And of course, there's no one brain region that just only does one thing and you knock that out and the person is immobilized. Really, it's more like these regions cooperate with each other in networks. But we do know that specific modules help with specific things. What about other things like emotions? So Roger Pearman, for example, talks a bit about emotional intelligence, and there are multiple regions of the brain that aid us with that. So this region over here, for many people, is involved with helping them mirror others' behavior. So mirroring could be for learning. For example, you watch somebody swing a tennis racket or golf club and think about how you would do that too, what that would feel like. Or maybe you're sitting with someone and listening, and then you have a sense of what's going on with them as you mirror their behavior for rapport building. Maybe not too consciously, that would be weird, but it's sort of automatically. Also, there's another region down way over sort of here in the right hemisphere that's involved with emotions, and yet another region sort of right about here involved with the emotions. Understanding emotions in a social context. Paying attention to body signals that tell us how we're feeling, seeing other people's body language, hearing their voice tone. So these are all the many different things. Just a few examples of dozens and dozens of things that we know, not just me, but the whole body of brain research out there. Open a neuroscience textbook or go to Wikipedia. The pictures will not be as graceful. I take that as my special ability to integrate information. But lots and lots of good stuff here. So what about type? Where does that come in? Well, neural circuits in the brain. We can look at individual brain regions and how active they are, and that's useful. But what I'm particularly interested in now is these different circuits in the brain, how different parts connect. And they show long-term wiring from years of habits that hopefully meet both our practical needs, which means you need to go to school and learn how to read and do math, which are not things that are naturally automatic in the brain. Cultural expectations, institutional things to get through, like, historically joining the military, getting married, on the job type of stuff, whether that's in agriculture or industry or information, or even for hunter-gatherer, that's where we honed much of our brains. So there are these neural long-term wiring, these neural pathways, and they help us meet our practical needs, and they help us meet our psychological needs. So what I've been curious to see is there a relationship between personality type and these neural pathways that are there? And the answer is yes, there is a statistical relationship. It's not deterministic. Probably the psychological type is about half the picture on average. Nature, nurture, it's about half the picture. And here's an example. So on the left, we see this bird's eye view of the brain, and this bird's eye view, the little triangle at the top is the nose, and on the side are the ears. And then there are some connections, and the strong connections are in red. and then weaker connections, sort of intermediate connections are in black, and then say the weakest of the strong are in gray, and maybe some yellows of borderline stuff. Sometimes you'll see that. Of course, I don't show all the connections. I'm really showing the person's strengths, the primary and secondary. And we can see here, there's this sort of, on the one on the left, there's more density of connections in the front of the brain, at the top half of the image. That's the front of the brain. And this is typical of people who prefer extroverting. This is not just my research. This is out there in the neuroscience. She also prefers sensing and feeling. And if we looked and dug into her skills, we would see she's good at initiating, syncing with others. Auditory skills are very good. Stuff involved with empathizing, and that P4-C4 connection is there. Improvising, there's the FP2 with F7, variety of things. So there is a relationship, not a surprise, extroverting, sensing, feeling, and those kinds of skills that she uses to support that. On the right, we see a very different picture. So this is Tim, and you can see a lot of connections in the back of the brain. You also see this sort of starburst pattern. And this is a stylized way to indicate all the brain regions activating at once. They don't all come out of like this central little node at the top. This is just a stylized way to represent something that would be very messy otherwise. He has INTP preferences, and he's, from what we know, that introverts tend to have more connections at the back of the brain, which he certainly does here. Tends to be very visual. He's very good at seeing. All of the stuff in the back is involved with analyzing, integrating, linking, reflecting. Some stuff involved with anticipating as well. He also actually has some, might be come as a surprise, some decent listening skills, but in this region here associated with this ear. But they're tied into other stuff for analysis. They're not about anything. Notice this region here. It doesn't link up to anything at the front of the brain that sort of would be obvious to other people. It's going on. So that's the kind of data I have to work with and the kind of thing we're going to be looking at today as we explore the 4 sensing perceiving types. So just to sum up the brain basics here, the brain is like an orchestra that usually plays our favorite songs. And I would say what's different about the brain from this image is that we have 2 conductors, not one. The left and the right prefrontal cortex are goal-focused and open-ended executives. And then the things that I do like that's really spot on is you notice that the musicians, well, you know, ideally they're playing in sync, but if you look at a few of them here closely, you see that some are doing their own thing. This one here on the left is asleep. This one here, it's not a trick. He really is playing the flute from his nose. She looks very concerned over here, as does he. You know, he's having a wonderful time on this side, totally into the music. So much like our brains, you know, sometimes they aren't all working, but on a good day, they're working together, like creating a beautiful song. Now, flow is one more thing that I want to talk about because it's relevant to the advice I give people in terms of coaching and the observations I have. And it's an example of just the broadness of the ways we can look at the brain. Flow is when we're fully immersed and energized while doing an activity. Sorry, it's supposed to say SPs here. I'll fix that in the slide. I missed that. What might help SP, sensing perceiving types, get into their zone? There's a whole bunch of things here, but the ones I call out that really notice is I would have some actors come in sometime and it's the handling of a dramatic crisis in a role play scenario. That their brains would get into the state where all the different regions are cooperating, they're in sync, and the person is relaxed. Another thing is listening briefly, then taking action, then listening and acting again, then listening and acting again, and sort of a cycle. So notice that there's action as a part of it and the senses are a part of it. So not a surprise with sensing perceiving types. And then another in blue, also tossing a ball back and forth with a partner or juggling many balls. It was really interesting to see that for many people who are not sensing perceiving types, as you add balls, or add complexity of the interaction, like trying to trick the person when playing the ball, sort of trick throw, that people's brains don't relax and they don't get into flow. The person gets, you know, they get flustered, and you know, only select parts of the brain work, or the brain gets very, very active trying to anticipate what happens. But in this case here, the sensing perceiving folks, yeah, is just, you know, you have fun with it and you relax with it, and you can even see it on their faces as they do it, that they're more relaxed. So when we engage a task for which we have expertise and we're motivated, and there's some element of improvisation there, then the brain can actually get relaxed and very energized with all the regions working in sync. And people of all types, you know, can experience flow. The question is what brings them into a state of flow. And there might be something related to their career, but just as easily it's something related to their type. So let's take a look at these 4 types, the SP types, thinking of who are these folks. They share a preference for sensing that's grounded in present action, relying on sensory input and tactics. So information is coming in, they process that in a way that's tactical. If you wonder what tactics is like, think of soccer, or for you international folks, football. And it's a very tactical sport. Basketball is another example that's very tactical. So you have to see what's going on, what's moving, who's where, what the opportunities are, and respond to all this information coming in real time in a way that's effective, that you score or you throw the ball to somebody else, whatever it is. And that's that. Then even that word grounded, it's not just focusing on present action, they're grounded in what's going on. And I like to use cartoons. A group of pilgrims travels many months to visit a sage on a mountaintop. The pilgrims enter the temple and ask, what is enlightenment? And the sage says, go pick some flowers at the entrance. And that's an action. It's not just, you know, I used to say what color were the flowers at the entrance, but that was more about memory. And I realized really, I just returned from a trip in the Southwest for 2 weeks of nonstop hiking, river rafting, bicycling, all of that with an ISFP. And it really was about doing. Gentle doing many times, but it was about doing. So go pick some flowers at the entrance. And in that act, there'll be many interesting things. Like, do you really want to pick those flowers? That's a choice that needs to be made. Maybe, you know, picking them kills them, even if they're beautiful. And then what do they smell? What do they look like? So there's a whole bunch of choices and opportunities that arise when we take action. It's not just, you know, we get the sensory data and then we act. Sometimes we act and then we get the sensory data. Now we're talking about 4 types here, and they're all improvisers. And one thing we see in the brain is that they rely on this tennis hop mode. And the way I liked it is actually a student of mine who described this years ago, ENTJ preferences actually, but I think he really got it right. If you watch tennis players, after they've hit the ball, they're sort of hopping a little bit on their toes like this. They're not standing still, and they're not jumping around the court, waiting, you know, sort of where's the ball going to come back. They're ready for action with a little bit of motion in there. So they maintain some momentum, they maintain their energy, and then whether the ball comes to the left or comes to the right, at a moment's notice, they can spring in that direction and work. And so we see the brain working like this, that in many cases, the brain, especially for the extroverted SP types, that they are, and by the way, with your questions, I'm going to answer those at the end, if that's okay. Because I see a lot of questions coming in and I can't respond to all of those. I'm not an SP type, sorry. I am definitely judging preferences. That they afford these rapid responses with that tennis hop that can happen to crises, to opportunities, whatever it is. Of course, there are 4 types inside of this improviser theme, the temperament, and there's the STP types that tend to use visual spatial brain regions that promote logical reasoning and weighing of variables. So all these different variables, we need to weigh those. Then there are SFP types, and in addition to that tennis hop pattern, they tend to use brain regions that promote listening and speaking around identity, intent, and values. One example, just sort of to show the difference, I found that STP types tend to rely upon vision to understand other people by looking and noticing body language and interpreting that. Whereas SFP types tend a little bit more to rely upon voice tone in order to gauge intention and what's going on with the person. So a little bit more visual or a little bit more auditory, there tend to be some biases like that that are between the types. But let's actually dig in and we'll talk about the SP folks in general, and then we'll go and take a look at the specific, each type specifically. So what we see in general is this theme of active adapting that they all share in common. This is very different from the original Myers-Briggs type indicator sort of debrief materials that would talk about sensing, even extroverted sensing, as something passive, that it was just taking information in through the 5 senses. That's how intuiting types tend to experience sensing. That is not how sensing types experience sensing. I mean, they do, there is that element, but that's, you know, like a brief introduction to what they do. There really is this active process that's going on of engaging the world and adapting to it and immersing in the present context. That's why they're so good at whatever context they're in. It could be business, tech industry, it could be surfing, it could be music, it could really be anything. Diplomacy is what is the present context, gathering all of the relevant data about that and immersing in that. And then that really gives the brain a great foundation, be very grounded to then move in whatever direction is needed. You know, if you want to be good at soccer, you need to know how to play, you need to know the players, you need to know the field, all of that. So there's a lot of knowledge that is actually behind the scenes with them, and the SP folks tend to not voice that knowledge, but it's there, and that's what allows them to do what they do. So some themes that I noticed with the brains is that they act quickly and smoothly to handle whatever comes up in the moment. This was through activities we do that involved improvisation. I don't do as many of those activities anymore, but still that's something that's important. And we see how the brain responds with this tennis hop-like pattern, that it can be quiet at first, especially with the extroverted sensing perceiving types. And then it's sort of like the baseline is very quiet, and only when something interesting comes in, then all of a sudden the activity will go up. Otherwise, it's not totally quiet. There's just like this little bit like waiting. The brain is like waiting for something to happen, little regions. It's slightly bip, 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 bip. And then, you know, when something happens, then it gets active. So an SP type could just be sort of sitting there or walking down the street and seem like not much is going on mentally with them. And that actually may be the case. But they're also conserving their resources, because the moment something interesting happens, and by moment, I mean, it could be less than a second, boom, then they're 100% and they're on it. And what brings them to be on it? It's that motion, action, nature. I noticed time and again, especially in the lab, we had a beautiful set of windows when I was at UCLA that looked down into park area, and just, you know, looking out onto the park would be more stimulating potentially to the brain, especially ISFPs, I remember, than the work in front of them. Things that are moving, opportunities for action. Adaptive physical multitasking, so then the video game like mind primed for action. And I noticed that this tennis hop pattern, actually a lot of people could show this when playing a video game, but the SP types could show this even when they weren't playing a video game. And then physical multitasking showed in things like a ball activity where they're tossing multiple balls back and forth. Often in touch with body sensations, and see this in terms of the brain wiring. Am I hungry? Am I tired? All of those things. How does something feel? The texture of things. Trust their senses and senses and gut instincts. And this actually shows up in the brain in what are called alpha waves. And it's the same with the body sensations as well. So alpha waves indicate that it's not just the neocortex, the sort of the new brain that's like logically processing information, but is information allowed to come up through the body, through the limbic system, which is like our old brain, the brain that we share with our cat and our dog and, you know, other mammals for sure, and allow that information to come in and inform what's going on in the higher brain. And alpha waves, most people will show those when you put them in a relaxed state or listening to music or something. But with sensing types and with thus the sensing perceiving types, they can show this more often, period. Just trusting that information that comes up. These were also, I know sensing perceiving subjects are ones that will say, can I finish or can I go on to the next thing even when the task isn't, quote, done. They're not ones to just like keep doing a task until I tell them to stop. Frequently they will even ask to make something more interesting or to move on to something else. So that's just a reminder that sort of there's this idea bored when sitting with a mental or rote task. Yeah, that's the case. Good memory for relevant details. There's a memory test that I used quite a bit, especially in the past. And they wouldn't remember every single detail of it, but they would remember relevant details. And that would be, I realize it's, left a little bit up to, it's a little bit subjective to say what's relevant, but what fits the situation rather than those details that are just remembering them for the sake of it. Like, who, unless they're in the art world, who painted this picture and what style is it and that kind of thing. They're not going to remember that. But they remember the action elements, the motion elements, the nature elements that are in the picture. The opportunities for action that were in the picture that asked for memory. They do not remember just random lists of things. And that is actually, they would score no better than intuiting types in that area. Tend to be relaxed, varying things a little, scanning the environment until an urgent situation or exciting option pops up. And then they get in the zone and use their whole mind to handle whatever is happening. So I think when we talk about, say, engagement in the workplace, if an SP type is not engaged, there's two things that can happen. One is that they're going to check out because it's just not interesting enough. Another is that they're going to constructively find some way to get more engaged by asking for something different, moving horizontally, adding something to their task. I suppose the third option would be being unconstructively adding to the situation. So by creating drama or creating a crisis in order to do something. But those are more with like younger sort of immature employees. I think when we're talking about people in leadership positions, they've learned to move quickly and to make sure that they even, because there's a tendency to miss things when we move quickly sometimes, and to be able to even notice what it is that might be moved. And if things aren't happening, how to make them happening and interesting without being disruptive. So I think that's really the trick is when they look like they're bored or they're being disruptive, is because there isn't really anything relevant for them to do to use their talents. So it's the same lesson we learn in all of type. How do you help people find and make use of their talents? Tend to test limits and take risks for big rewards. I certainly saw that the past 2 weeks. There's a site in Utah's Zion National Park called Angel's Landing. And the very top of it is incredibly scary. There's a narrow causeway that is, well, not this narrow, but it feels like that. And you have to cross over that causeway in order to reach the final point at the very top when you can take beautiful pictures and all of that. And I was just too scared to do that final thing. I was aware logically that I couldn't. But my ISFP travel companion was also scared he admitted, but actually went ahead and did it anyway. And so I think that's a really cool thing about this temperament here, these types. Maybe impatient to finish, I found that all the time. Okay. Before I actually will take a brief look at the questions just to see where we are with that in these 2 minutes here, if I can find the, I guess I can't really find it.
Well, Dario, I can moderate some of the questions.
It just, what happened is the window hit itself, and there's a little orange thing that says that there are 5 posts in chat, but it doesn't want to, oh, here it is. Okay, I just needed to press on the chat. Yes, actually, so yeah, thank you, Carol. And in fact, it's really great because both of my interns this past 6 months are students of color, and they really have brought in a huge number. I did have before as well, but to really balance it out. Because I was getting a lot of people, specifically women in their mid-50s, through the type community, But specifically like that age range and so on, and just to get a balance again, going back to getting younger men who were Black and Hispanic and so on has really been very nice, as well as having the industriousness of the UCLA students who are awesome. But Ben David asks, was Kiersey right about ESTP preference people being the best at reading body language? I would say they and ENFP in terms of the brain wiring are sort of like neck and neck, but those two types stand out compared to all the others, and we're going to see that with ESTP in a moment. In general, ESTP is deceptive because they may not say anything or show what they're noticing, but oh boy, or do they tend to have the brain wiring for that? And then another question about pictorial word usage. We'll get back to that later. Let's go on and talk about ESTP since we're there. Okay. So these are, I showed two examples of each type because I want to stress that there's no like, it's not like each type corresponds to like a particular exact brain pattern and then that's it. Okay, around ESTP or ISFP or whatnot, there is a variety of things, and what we want to know is that brain pattern meeting the person's needs, the practical needs and the psychological needs? So I found it's very important to ask, what is your career, along with what is your type? And part of the career is also the education, upbringing, and so on. So let's take a look at the ESTP on the left, and what we see is a lot of red lines on the left here, and I'll interpret all of this for you all. So the strong analytical left brain style. So that's that left hemisphere. So when people say left brain, meaning analytical or whatnot, that's in fact this ESTP here. Very goal focused. So this goal focused executive up here, coming down, and you see this line, these three lines coming down and to O1 and to PZ and to F7. So what does that mean in practice? So he's very focused, goal focused on how things look and function. And with this PZ region here, this is like building a machine in the mind's eye and then running things through the machine. I think this is particularly important to understand for the opposite type folks, so the intuiting feeling types, that thinking and language are not synonymous with each other. And that a lot of thinking types really end up using this region of the brain in the back and the parietal area that essentially creates like a visual spatial model of how something works, and then as data comes in, they plug that into this machine, and then they run the machine to see how things are going to turn out. And that's very much what we see here. The style is common with the ISTP as well. Also good with short-term memory, learning by observing, that's this region up here, and visualizing in the mind's eye. So the strong visual thing here, strongly analytical. Also has some decent auditory skills. So these regions by the ears here, we see quite a bit of connectivity here around the ears. Not super strong, but it's there. And his area is business communications. And it's interesting that he chose an area that's probably fitting for him, both in terms of his type and in terms of his development. So he's in his late 20s. And if I remember his age correctly, he's around 30, we'll say that. But it also leans into his developmental area. So using some of that feeling function in terms of interacting with others, that social aspect of business communication. And then he has some kinesthetic connections, particularly, not very strong, but you see that in sort of the center of the brain here, running across the middle. And this is all just sort of related to practical stuff, particularly on the left-hand side here. So these are things that are just, I say C3 is involved with things like having a template or routine for how to use something. Now, so that's one example. Now let's take a look at this other person here, this ESTP, also male. I do have a couple of female ESTPs, but I felt these were the best examples. So two males here. And this one here is in his late 60s. So very, very different age. And so we're getting the different kind of diversity here with age. And very interesting. Well, one thing is you'll notice that the one on the right doesn't have as many little circles in it. Okay, that's because they use a different machine. So the one that's on the right is an older EEG machine. The one on the left is a little bit newer one. So they look slightly different, but don't worry about that. The only relevant thing is that the ones that use the older machine, we're going to have fewer notable connections. So they'll look a little bit more sparse and actually then easier to read. But in any case, what we see is a clear bias in the front left. Overall, there's a bias towards the left, but we also see quite a bit in the back of the brain, particularly the back right of the brain. And so his brain organization is definitely different. It's different. We still see this bias a little bit towards the left front. So in terms of this in-charge style of being a decision maker, of engaging the environment, that remains the same for both of them. But, wired differently to meet the same needs. He has great open-ended deductive reasoning. That's this line that runs from this open-ended CEO all the way over to here. This region is involved in mental planning, deduction, and word usage. So really, really great open-ended deductive reasoning. And I found this common for ESTPs. If A leads to B and B leads to C, then A leads to C. There's this natural reasoning process. In this case here, his reasoning is more verbal as opposed to the other ESTP who had a little bit more visual spatial reasoning. Nonetheless, he still has solid visual spatial reasoning skills. Look at this stuff in the back here, this P3 and P4, and this region in the back, these visual areas in the back of the brain, sort of at the bottom, solid. So slightly different connections, but still solidly visual spatial stuff. Great skills for identifying things, weighing pros and cons. He has some attention in terms of the auditory stuff to word content, but not on this side over here, which would be attention to voice, tone, and intention. So he's missing that piece that's saying ESFP, the feeling SP type would have. And then the great body language down here, which we usually see as this O2 region, connecting with something else, P4 or T6, something like that. So you see good connectivity. In fact, it's this little sort of trapezoid-like box that ESTPs tend to have. In fact, you'll see in the other one, he has the beginning of this trapezoid box, but he's young. It's not quite as strong as this one here. So he's relying upon body language a lot to understand people, whereas the one on the left was much more about the business, the auditory communication. Okay, and then he has this really interesting F8P4 link. What is this about? So this is this link that runs sort of here to this way. And in fact, I haven't seen this very often in anybody. And he asked me, what does this mean? And I said, this region up front here is involved with things like personal identity and beliefs, what you like and dislike. And this region back here, P4, is a variety of things, but essentially weighing pros and cons, working with many variables at once. And he said, wow, that's really interesting, because he said in college, he had his major was philosophy, and he focused on the philosophy of people's different beliefs. And I'm like, oh, well, that's really interesting that he's carried it with him for 40 years. And his task, by the way, is, as he describes, he gets paid to fly around the world and talk to people. That's what he does. Not one-on-one, mostly groups of people. And that's maybe where that difference comes in, where this business communications guy is much more one-on-one kind of stuff as liaison, and that's maybe explains some more auditory skills. Okay, now let's take a look at ISTP. How are they similar? How are they different? They're one letter different, but what's really going on? So instead of leading with extroverted sensing, they're leading with introverted thinking. So they're introverts, they have very strong thinking preference. Usually they support with sensing. And of course, like anybody, they're going to develop some of their opposite type. So let's take a look and compare these two. The one on the left, we can clearly see, like the INTP example we saw at the beginning of today, has more connections in the back of the brain for sure. Typical of introverts. He still has this really good connectivity in front between these two executive regions, as we would hope most adults do, but they aren't really connected much to anything else. Connected a little bit over here. It's a slightly more left hemisphere-ish, but that's it. In many ways, he actually looks like the ESTP, except an introverted version of the ESTP, with even more enhanced visual spatial skills. We see all this density in the back here, this capacity for integration, for reflection, in a visual spatial manner. Some auditory skills we see as well. And where we do see the kinesthetic stuff, you'll notice in this little C4 region, so it's this region here, that there's a lot of weak connection. So he does actually have these physical skills, and he's a physical therapist. And he works with the whole body, not just like pinpoint here or pinpoint there. He's working with the whole person, making adjustments, giving the person exercise advice, walking them through the exercises, doing also some like targeted massage. So really, really interesting that the C4 region, which is normally involved in physical motion and so on, because he's moving throughout his day, is not super strong, but it's connected in a weak way to a variety of things. Overall, I'd say there's some bias, maybe in the front towards the left, but a little bit more towards the right overall. And then this one region, P402, is this nice red link. Here's an example with weighing pros and cons in visual way. So that's connecting vision with weighing pros and cons. So that's sort of like, that's what you do with the physical form, is noticing what's going on with the person visually and then working with that. And he said he actually often closes his eyes as he's working with somebody and can feel through his hands, getting a picture of what's going on with the person mentally. And they actually have looked at his brain activity as he has worked on several subjects, separate from this assessment. And it's really fascinating how he goes to these alpha waves, this body-connected mode, while he's doing the massage with somebody. And visual as well. The other ISTP, also very visual spatial in the back. I think that's really a theme of the type. I met an ISTP drummer. Even her approach to music was very kinesthetic. So we see the strong bias, again, introvert, more back of the brain, a little bit more left hemisphere. And this person, is this a student? Yeah, I think Yeah. No, not a student. But nonetheless, oh, right. So what this person was is, what did he do? He designed 3D packaging for consumer products. So you're like using a computer-aided design, and here's like a product, and how do you wrap this up in a nice way so that it has like padding in different dimensions and so on. He also acts in a managerial role with other people under him implementing stuff. So it's not a surprise when we see this goal focus appear at the front, at the top, FP1, running down to very precise visual engineer type of skills, because he's doing computer-aided design. What was really cool is he had also this red link here, O1 to P4, and it was so fast. Every 1/6 of a second, this region was firing. And what does this do? So it's working with multiple variables at once, pros and cons, in a visually precise way. And he said, that's literally what I do when working with creating packaging. He's saying I have to see in my mind like what different arrangements could possibly work in order to be effective packaging for something. And also, by the way, very good combo for video games. Very, very skilled with video games, with the geometry problems, solve them very quickly and all perfectly. So really taking those stereotypical ISTP skills to the max there. Also has some managerial type of stuff. So that T5 region over here is often involved, yes, with visual detail, but also verbal detail and managing social feedback. And that's where he gets some of his, how does he work with others? He lets them act and then gives them feedback and works with them. And then pretty good goal-focused use of language as well. And finally, you'll see this little bit of a creative brainstorm in the background. And that's typical of ISTP and ISFP, is actually they have this intuitive capacity. And they have, type-wise, and then they have this creative brainstorming capacity as well in terms of the brain, just maybe not the strongest thing. And it's sort of gray, so it's not the strongest thing, but it's there in the background. Okay, let's take a look at ESFP. And so we're going to see here hopefully some contrast, because the sensing, thinking, perceiving types, we notice very visual spatial kind of thinking. We notice introversion, extroversion played a role. They tend to be a little bit more analytical, but they also, those visual skills can be very, very holistic as well. So we don't want to say they're just analytical. That's not the case. What's different with ESFP? Well, for one thing, let's take a look at this ESFP on the left. Here, she's self-employed with various trade skills, cutting hair, doing odd jobs, actually repairing stuff, a whole variety of things. And she's in her 20s. Still just, half of it is enjoying life, and the other half is then, doing these various things in order to get along. Wouldn't describe her as highly ambitious, but we do see it maybe some clues of that. Why? Is because up at the top here, there's not very strong executive. There's sort of a gray line between these. And she's also still in her 20s, so she'll probably continue that further. And those sort of goal-focused versus open-ended and being able to balance this. Overall, we see this bias towards the front of the brain, typical of extroverts. Auditory stuff is really strong. Look at all these red lines coming out of T4. Oh, nothing is going to get past her in terms of your voice tone and what that's going to betray or suggest. Intentions, also musical skills, she has those as well. And then connecting over with this T3, paying attention to word content, interacting with people. So really like very nice auditory skills, goal-focused approach to voice tone and intention, listens for belief and identity. And the overall in the brain, there seems to be a balance of analytical and holistic. We don't see a strong bias towards the left or towards the right. And where there is reasoning skills, they're mostly in this F3 and F4 regions appear that are involved in language-based reasoning. So this is a nice cut. We see some examples compared to the thinking types. These feeling types here are much more auditory, therefore language-based reasoning instead of visual spatial reasoning, which you'll notice is like nothing special down here. And really what they're capable of with language is really great stuff here. Also his capacity to be a manager. I can see that in her with that stuff that's in the front and that gray line that runs F7 to F8. Anyway, not to fall behind. And just to clarify, yes, the red links are the strongest links, then black, and then less are the gray areas. Yeah, I only mentioned that briefly once at the start, but let me say that again. Now, this other one on the right, he's a really interesting case. And I think it's an example of type development and where that can go. So he has ESFP preferences, for sure. And the first, he's in his 30s, the first decade of his life was, well, not in childhood, but of adult life, was as an actor and fashion model. And if you like horror films, you've probably seen him before. But now, for the past 5 or 6 years, he has been training as a shaman. He still does the acting and the fashion model stuff, but all of his passion and day-to-day interest and so on is around shamanism, which is a strong element of introverted intuiting. Although the approach that he's taken is very physical, and a lot of it is about helping people heal physically. So there's still this strong sensing element there. Weak executive activity at the front here. And I would say this is not typical of ESFPs, but I wanted to point this out as an example of where type development that maybe happens too soon, where that can go, or if somebody is sort of at a time in their life when they're a little bit like changing directions or in very different places. And his style is definitely one that's like really, I like him a lot, but it would be challenging for us to work together because even though the opportunity has come up, because we're so different in terms of his being goal focused and just that being a challenge. Heavily driven by sensory data. That's what we see. So I really say like he's almost like a poster child for sensing, perceiving, in terms of this huge like swath of stuff running through the middle of the brain here. Okay, this big stuff. Heavily driven by sensory data, auditory data here with the ears, visual data, these red lines coming up, visual data. And these red lines, by the way, go up and intersect with this region here involved with identity and beliefs. Strong kinesthetic stuff. Okay, there's all of these, the C3 and C4. The C4 region well connected, so this is involved in body movement and sensation. This side over here also involved, and it has these yellow lines, and these are usually involved in templates or routines, which you would need as an actor or a fashion model, and potentially even as a shaman, and those developing as well. So very auditory, very kinesthetic. And while the visual stuff is not distributed all over where it works, it really works strongly. Strong empathy link, this bridge, C4 to P4, very typical of people who have strong feeling of empathy. So not only do they know their own mood and sensations, like whether they're hungry or angry, but they can translate that into feeling what other people are feeling as well. And so that's really sort of nice contrast between two different people, seeing them how one is a little bit more, I am sorry I couldn't get a leadership position. I would want a third person, but I felt that the one on the left, even though like she's still young, her brain wiring is really quite typical of ESFP. So just going ahead to show it. And then the one on the right is, I'm just showing him because he's atypical, but he's also a really great example of a sort of extreme like ESFP in terms of with some like early type development going on, but this really, really strong like middle of the brain kinesthetic stuff, auditory stuff. Okay, and last but not least at all is ISFP. And on the left and on the right, is cool on the left, like with ISTP, we see a little bit of this gray brainstorming creative pattern in the background. And type-wise, in adulthood, they will be developing and certainly by midlife have pretty well developed intuiting ability as well. And to see that in a creative way. So this person on the left is electrician and musician with a clear auditory bias, these strong red lines coming out by the ears, not a surprise. And even well, first of all, a lot of the ISFPs I've had and ISFJs are musicians, even if that's not something that they do professionally. They just play music. So it is a hobby, and then easily can move over into something that's more professional. Both open-ended and goal-focused when listening and speaking, focus on voice tone and intent, but also good with word content. So that slower pace that they have compared to ESFP means that they're taking in more information, spending more time integrating that information. We see a yellow line down here between T5 and T6. It really is a nice example of the person spending time to take in new information, integrate it with old information, that reflective process that's there. And then he has this link, FP2, so the open-ended executive coming down to C3, this area involved with templates and routines, and also involved controlling the right hand movement. Not a surprise as a musician either. As a musician, you need to know chords, you need to know various different musical patterns, being able to use your hands well, and just really, really neat, but in an open-ended way, not in a goal-focused way. So there's that capacity for improvisation. Okay, then this other example here, I didn't write down the career. I'm not sure that this is that important. This is a fairly good example of ISFP, different kind of ISFP. Bias to the back of the brain, not a huge bias to the back of the brain, little bit of bias. And that's where I think we get this kind of thing, the difference between trait and type. So remember, type is about preference. So you use both hands. Well, I use both hands, but I prefer my right one for most things, although I use my left for a few things, like playing guitar or holding a hockey stick. This is more, I lead with my left. But for the most part, I prefer my right. Whereas trait introversion or trait extroversion is really about the behavior you show on the surface. And that's oftentimes, I believe, neuroscience research is showing, and I believe what we see here, that this person may prefer introversion, but handles the extroverted stuff pretty well. Has this managerial link up here, has a fair number of connections in the front. Not tons of them, not like an ESFP or ESTP. There's still a little bit of a bias at the back, but a little bit more balanced in terms of skills. High capacity for integration and reflection on diverse data. So look at this stuff in the back of the brain here, all of this kinesthetic stuff coming in, the sensation from the body, tactile feel, auditory stuff coming in very strong, visual spatial skills and taking the time to reflect upon those visual skills, also the data coming in down here. So beautiful example of like using all of the senses and sort of bringing those in and sort of swimming in those. And then conversely also making use of the body. And this motivation, what we see here in the center, these two regions and then culminating together with the strong link right in the middle. So very much this use of the body, movement, sensation. And then we see some other things, like over here, we see this link between voice tone and intention and personal belief. And some analytical skill, by the way. This sort of, here's some analytical skills here. Probably good with factual memory, verbal and spatial details, remembering those. And then making some use of them. Sort of coming down to this capacity to, a little bit of a capacity to use the brain as a machine, not like we saw with the sensing, thinking, perceiving types, but sort of ISFP moving in that direction, probably because of career choices. I don't remember what that career was, but you could go look if you want. I'll look that up. Okay, so some tips to close up. Active adapting, immersing in the present context. What have we learned? Prefer stimulating environments with rich sensory input. They like windows, they like enticing views, they like lively decor. Put those in there. By the way, I get complimented by SP types all the time coming into my office. My office is very colorful. I don't really have a picture to show you here, but I have pictures and pillows of different colors. I have stuffed animals. And not like for the sake of having stuffed animals, they all have like a history to them. They were gifts. Like I have a Jedi Kermit the Frog that was a gift from a friend at Disney. Like all of these in my bookcase, very colorful. They love that. The room seems alive. Encourage movement and touch. Offer breaks when remaining productive, such as talking while walking through a park. We had one ESFP come in, and he would only do the brain imaging on the condition that we would do it outside, and that he could stand during the session, which he did do. You can do that with EEG. As long as they're not doing a dance, it's okay. Make ideas meaningful with relevant content, sensory details, physical tools. Allow for trial and error. So don't get too abstract. Don't rely on metaphor. You can use metaphor, just don't rely on it. Focus on what's relevant and start with and support metaphors with immediate uses. This relevant part, I realize it's how do you decide that, especially for types that aren't good at that. To see everything as potentially relevant. It's not about potential. It's like, what is this context? Why are we here? And then making sure we stay within those bounds most of the time. Focus on challenges and allow for resourceful responses to crises. Hold back from over-defining the experience or making it too safe, because that's going to prevent them from doing that improvising and getting into that state of flow we talked about at the beginning. Let them respond to whatever comes up and be willing to join them if you wish to earn their friendship and respect. There's nothing worse than playing a sport with somebody, like you go out and play tennis and the other person doesn't know how to play. I mean, then it's just really frustrating. And it's not that you dislike the person, it's just you're not going to want to play tennis with them anymore. The same, you know, with anything else in the workplace, they want you to be able to join in, whether that's competitively or cooperatively or a mix of both. And through those created shared experiences, then friendship arises, then respect arises. Okay, for our last 2 minutes, we do have one question I didn't ask. So here's a question about word usage, and saying sensing, perceiving types have pictorial word usage. So they might have colorful expressions that they use, but there's essentially a picture in their mind's eye, and they're just the expression is meant to convey that picture. And it could be something that, well, colorful, you know, that's a polite word for a lot of different things. Let's see. And then is there often a reference to what's qualitative, to the qualities of objects? For example, tools, that the golf club is like this kind of club or it works this way. Surgeon's tools, similarly. And then part of this question too, the sequence is, oh, right, like picking things that sound motivating, like calling a movement like the Panther movement rather than the, you know, beta movement or F4 movement or something like that, just because it sounds better. You know, I mean, I'm not sure there's something specific in the brain that chalks up all of these. I would say exactly. I would say it seems clear that the sensing, thinking, perceiving types have very strong visual spatial skills. This P3 region is often involved. I mean, it has the whole set of skills that aids with things like hunting and sports. So the more you can bring in like a hunting metaphor or a sports metaphor, assuming that it is relevant and their interest, then that's going to speak to them. The functional quality of thing, of course, this is pragmatic temperament, and there are those sensory details. You know, the texture of something, the shape of something, how it works when you use it. They're going to feel all of that. It's not just like, oh, I look and I see it's this kind of club, and so I use it for this kind of action. They want to know, how does it feel? Because they feel it. And that feel will influence how they do. And then what is one idea you could take away from today to re-energize and add to your work? Just sort of think about that for a moment before I hand it over to our host for any closing comments. Okay, this is more about me, where you can contact me, and then upcoming events again. And I will, I'll leave this here for the moment. Todd, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, mostly, Dario, thank you. My thanks. And I'll also just add that I continue to be fascinated, humbled, but mostly fascinated by these findings, and very excited by all the possibilities for putting your work into our work, which is helping folks to take this science and simplify and democratize it to build more productive and rewarding relationships, teams, and leaders, which I know is what most of you in attendance spend at least part of your time doing. So if any of you share my enthusiasm about Dario's work and are ready to learn more about putting this science into your toolkit, we'd be excited to show you how. There are, as we mentioned, several opportunities, including in September. Dario will be back to talk about the neuro secrets of NPs. Dr. Pearman's on the stage later this month and again in August. The dates are shown there, and you can always check out our webinar offerings at matrixinsights.com/webinars. And Dario, if you'll advance the slide one more, for anyone who'd like to reach out, learn more, ask other questions, suggest other topics for future discussion, or to see the leadership dashboard or the EQ dashboard in action, we'd welcome the chance to give you a proper introduction to our technology and show you how to put this brain science into your classroom, your coaching, of the programs you're building. My email is shown here, todd.nielsen@matrixinsights.com, and you can visit us at matrixinsights.com. So on behalf of Dario Nardi, again, thank you, Dario, for joining us on this super hot day. For those who might have joined midstream or might be watching the recording, Dario's in proper attire when it's 107 degrees in California. So on behalf of Dario and everyone here at Matrix Insights, we thank you for joining us for today. We encourage you to pop back in and visit with us and attend a future webinar, and we look forward to hearing from you and working with you. Dario, have a great day. Stay cool.
Thank you, all of you as well. Thank you.